Today we're going to be transitioning into what's called micro-sociology. But before we do, there's one more sociologist that we need to discuss because he's the transition between macro-sociology, so broad subjects, and micro, so more narrow, looking at the individual. And that is Max Weber. He is responsible, he actually has his own sociology theory, so the Weberian theory, and he wanted to study the effects of society on the individual. So he's looking at the transition or the shift from traditional economies into that modern industrial nation or society. Um, when Weber studied society, he believed that it was especially important to follow the principle of Verstehen, which means that you have to understand social behavior by putting yourself in another's place. You may have heard somebody say that you can't understand until you walk a mile in their shoes. That's the kind of mentality that Weber used when studying society. He also, in studying society, believed that it was important to include something he called rationalization, which is a mindset that emphasized knowledge, reasoning, and planning. He believed that in society, we were taking economic logic and applying it to everyday life. So things like a bureaucratic goal, to be efficient or goal oriented. We were now applying those same bureaucratic goals into our individual lives. George Ritzer wrote a book about it later on called McDonaldization of Society. He wrote that in 1993, and we're going to talk about that later in the class. But applying the same, fast food strategies into our everyday life, quick, efficient, um, something that meets our need in a very quick fashion. So Weber has considered this transition because he's taking a look at society, so big groups, the macro sociologists, but he is transitioning us into how does the individual motivation lead to certain actions and shape that society. So he is our transition piece into micro sociology. And our first sociologist we have to look at for microsociology is George Herbert Mead. He's going to be the one who really is given credit for creating the perspective of symbolic interactionalism, which is where we're going to start to look at the connections between the individual and society. This is the view that tends to be most popular in sociology today. So George Herbert Mead studies the connection between thought and individual between thought and action between individuals and society. So he's going to study those connections. He suggests that the social process gives meaning to objects in our society, that people interact and the meanings then come from these interactions. So maybe it's things like the flag. Okay, here you've got this object, and it doesn't really mean a whole lot until we start interacting. We've just come off the Olympics. We've seen the flag a lot. We associate it with the pledge or the national anthem. It brings emotions of patriotism and loyalty. It's something that we have strong feelings towards. Okay, whereas maybe if we saw the flag from Costa Rica or South Sudan, it wouldn't have those same it wouldn't have that same meaning for us because we're not interacting with it. We don't have that piece of the equation. George Herbert Mead's ideas are really kind of then expanded by Herbert Blumer. Okay, so these two men together are given credit for the Chicago School of Sociology. Really grew in the 1900s in terms of being an influential piece of sociology. Blumer is actually the one who names Mead's work Symbolical Interactionalism. He put that title to it. Blumer's contribution to sociology really deals with conducting interviews and collecting observational data. These are the research methods that he's going to use, and the research methods are something we're going to talk about in component 1.4. This is different than a functionalist or conflict perspective where they were mostly gaining their research through collecting statistical data, whether it be from surveys or government records. Right? Building on these guys and also really kind of a similar to the Chicago School of Sociology, she's not actually involved in it, but really built on those ideas is Jane Addams. Jane Addams is also a symbolic interactionalist. She also followed the Chicago School of Sociology, that kind of mindset. She is somebody that you may remember studying from U.S. history, looking at immigration in the 1900s. Jane Addams' contribution to sociology deals with applied sociology, so doing something with the information that you've gathered. She really believed that it was a sociologist's responsibility to then take that problem or issue that they were studying and take a hands-on approach. Her focus was on poor immigrants, single mothers in Chicago, and to help deal with this, or her hands-on part, was the creation of the Hull House, which was a settlement house which provided shelter, medication, legal advice, education, training to these people in need. And then our last symbolic interactionalist that we need to talk about is Erving Goffman. Erving Goffman contributes to sociology the idea of a dramaturgy, okay, that we represent ourselves strategically based on our situation. You present a certain image of yourself at school. And at church, you might present a different image, and with your friends and with your family, a different image even. He called this our self on loan, that we were constantly changing based on the situation or the context. So looking at how does individual and society connect, but looking at it at a very personal location by location or context by context basis. All right, and that gets us through our early sociologists. Again, remember in this component, you are asked to be able to identify these people and then explain their contributions. So you're going to need to make sure that you are comfortable with what are their key contributions and being able to explain what that means.